we're going to go all the way back to the beginning of the map, and we're going to talk about respawns. So, just like bosses and patrols, the game uses your player location to determine where dead teammates will respawn. This is why, if someone is dead, you will see a lot of players move backwards through the map to get a quote-unquote better respawn for their teammate. And so what does that mean? This cyan colored orb, or teal or whatever color this is, will dictate where a dead teammate will respawn. And it's based on where, again, the furthest player progression on the map is. So right now I'm the only player, so it's only watching me. But if there's still 2 or 3 other teammates alive, it'll take whoever's furthest along this path to decide where your teammate respawns. And we can see where that is in level debug by following the line. So for this orb here, if we are behind this orb, our teammate will respawn in this market area. That's the closest respawn you can get. However, if this is just for an example, I guess, because it's a little more convoluted, and I'll go into that in a second. But for right now, if I were to take one step to the left and I am past this orb now, that means that this close respawn is no longer on the table. It will instead spawn them at the next closest respawn that we are behind. So we're currently behind these 2 orbs. It will respawn them in this market area. And that is a large gap between respawns. The difference between going from here to here and from the spawn of the map all the way down past one trigger, past another 2 triggers to get your teammate here, can be the difference between winning and losing a map. If someone dies and you're down to 3 players, you do not want to have to go through 3 potential trigger spawns to get that player up. You would much rather get them up here. And that's just the difference between standing right here and standing right here. Now, you don't have to memorize every single respawn point on the maps, but there are some that are very good to learn. Going a little bit deeper into the respawn mechanics, you can see for this orb there are 2 lines that extend out into this area, and each is associated with 1 spot that a player can respawn. But there's a 3rd respawn point. So where is that one? And we can follow it up to here. This is the 3rd respawn point, and you can see that this one is also just in the market here. It's right here. So with that knowledge, we can say that if one teammate has died and there are 3 people alive, we only need to worry about this respawn point here. So as long as we're behind that respawn point and only 1 person is dead, that 1 person will spawn in the market below. However, if 2 people are dead, even if we're behind this respawn point, only 1 person will spawn at the close respawn. Even though there's 3 spots here, we are technically in front of 2 of them. So if 2 people are dead and we do not back up all the way to this point, 1 will spawn close here and 1 will spawn far here. The same is true for if 3 people are dead. I've been told by people before that there is only 1 respawn location in this area, and that's true on some maps, but for this one in particular, there are 3 respawn locations here. It's just that most of the time, people don't back up all the way to this point to allow all of the people respawn down there. They only worry about this one, which is fine if one person is dead, but if it's 2 or more, you've messed up. So just like monster and patrol triggers, where you can kind of teleport your player progression to mess with the game and take advantage of hitting those triggers when you want to, you can do the same for respawn triggers. So say you are down here and a teammate dies, and you want to make sure that they spawn in that close respawn instead of the far one. Normally, if you are looking at just the map progression line, you would run all the way through here and up and try and get past this respawn point here, which may or may not be possible, depending on what enemies are around, ambient specials, whatever. But take that same situation and let's take a different path. Right now the game thinks I am far forward in map progression, but if I just jump up here and then take one step to the right, all of a sudden the game thinks I'm over here as far as map progression. And you can see the number jump again. It goes from 8% here to 10.6% here. So what does that do? That puts us behind that respawn point. So as long as only one person is dead, you can actually stand anywhere in this area down these halls, at least to a certain point. I think it's like right here. Yeah, it teleports you forward. As long as you're behind halfway point for each of these hallways here, you will get that good respawn. The other thing that this accomplishes is it puts you closer to that respawn. So I've seen people who, when someone dies, they don't know exactly where these respawn cutoffs are, so they just continuously move backwards in the map. So pretend we have 3 people alive and only 1 person dead, and everyone runs all the way back because they don't know where the respawn cutoff is, and they're over here, just going as far back as they can, and you get a respawn. And now we can watch the timer. It's 29:54. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, around 7 to 8 seconds of time that's completely lost and was not necessary compared to getting your team up there. So if you just stood here or anywhere in here, you're just that much closer to immediately getting your teammate up. So knowing these respawn cutoffs can be, again, just like the monster patrol triggers, the difference between winning and losing a map. 8 to 10 second difference in walking to get your teammate up can lose you the map.
This is but the start of the slaughter, darlings.
Another interesting spot to point out on Bell is over here. So this is second trigger area. If someone dies in this area, let's look and see. Here are 3 respawn locations for a teammate. Remember, we want to be behind these respawn locations to get that respawn. If we're ahead of them, we don't get it. If we're behind it, we'll get it. So where does this put our teammate if they're respawning? It puts them just ahead in the next alleyway for a very close, quick respawn. And what happens if we miss that respawn? It will put them over here in the market. That's not where I want to be. Over here. Okay. So what happens if there's a dead teammate and you're getting a horde spawn and you don't want to fight right here to be behind these 3 respawn triggers? You want your teammate to spawn close, obviously, but this is a really bad spot to fight because enemies can come down here and enemies can come here, and you can't really keep them both in front of you, and it's also a very tight spot. It's easy to just get trapped in here against a horde. Gas rats are bad, blightstormers are bad. What if there was a better spot to stand? You can actually stand over here, and you'll see my map progression is forward. If you touch the wall, it teleports here, and is actually behind those respawn areas. And you can also stand on the wood here and have a little bit more mobility before it teleports you forward. So as long as everyone is on the same level as far as where to stand, you can actually hug this back wall and stand up here on this wood crate here and still get the good respawn just forward, and you don't have to fight in the worst spot there. Another thing to point out about respawns is that it's not always correct to go back as far as you can to get better respawns, because Fatshark is Fatshark sometimes. So you'd think if I have a respawn that puts me here and I move backwards through the map, I will get a respawn that's even closer, even just up there. But sometimes that's not the case. So if we can examine here, as long as we are behind this point here, our teammates will respawn on the lower side of the market here in Screaming Bell. And so if you have enough time, you might think, well, if I can get a respawn there, let's back up and just get an even closer respawn. But let's look to see where that other respawn is. This is the next respawn that you would pass to try and get your teammates a closer spawn. And let's follow it up. Now, wait a second. This is technically closer if you're just looking at, you know, how you could fly there. But as far as actually walking through the level, you have to go all the way around, up the stairs, walk through the plaza, and come to here to get a teammate. So by going backwards in the map, you've actually given your team a worse spawn. Now, you can get a better respawn here if you are able to make it to this set of respawn triggers. This will put them just in that alleyway just forward. But if you attempt, say you're in this alleyway and you want your teammates to have this respawn, and you attempt to get it for them by walking down here, you get caught up by specials, hordes, whatever, and you make it to this point, and you did not get behind these respawn orbs, you've just gotten your teammate a worse respawn, because it will use the next closest one that you are behind. If you're in front of these ones, it goes to the next ones that you're behind, which is these ones, which gives your teammate a bad respawn up here. So specifically on Screaming Bell in this area, you really want to think about, hey, I've got an okay respawn. They're spawning in the market on the lower side over there. I know there's a better respawn down there. Can I make it there in time? Because if I can't, I'll actually give them a worse respawn forward. So that's just one example of a time that it's not always correct to go all the way backwards for a respawn. And there are a lot of these throughout the different maps where in general it is correct to just keep going back, but every once in a while Fatshark puts a respawn in where if you can't make it back far enough, either because of enemies in your way or sometimes there's a drop down that just prevents it, it's actually better to be forward to get a good respawn. Any other questions on respawn mechanics here? There's one more just random example of that I can show you guys. It's not in Screaming Bell. It's actually in Against the Grain. But it's another one that I like to point out to people, to where it's not always correct to keep going backwards. Most of the time it is, but not always. And again, it's not always a lot, but it can be the difference between winning and losing a map, having a teammate down, and not getting them the correct respawn. So let's take a look at Against the Grain real quick.
Rock blood raiding parties are cutting loose in the fields around Usingen. I don't need to tell you what that means for the poor bastards in their path. You're heading to Morgensloft, biggest farm in the area. If there are survivors,
So here's Against the Grain.
hope there are.
Just like Screaming Bell, we'll see these respawn checkpoints or whatever you want to call them. As long as you're behind these in this field, your teammate will spawn at the other end of the field. If you go past these orbs, your teammate will spawn here, past the first trigger. This area is very interesting. I like this area for respawns because you'll notice that the close respawns right over there, the cutoff for them is right here. So you can walk around this whole area waiting for a respawn. You can even come up to here. And your teammates will still spawn, just I'll walk through the building. Over here. If anyone ever dies when you're in this area, you haven't taken the drop down yet, all you need to do to get them to respawn 20 feet away from you is to jump over this fence, and you are now behind the respawn cutoff, and they will just spawn right there. So it's a really good one to know about. Now the one that I was talking about not always going as far back as possible, is in this area right here. If you look, there's these respawn orbs here. If you don't know where these are, you're going to go as far back as possible, all the way to the drop down, thinking that you're helping. And you actually won't. This one you're already past, technically, once you've taken the drop down. But pretend that you do know where these orbs are, and you want to go to the furthest back orbs that you possibly can. Where does that put you? It puts you over here.
No sense admiring the view. Hurry!
In the middle of this field, which most of the time playing Against the Grain, you don't come back here. There's just way too many ambients, and it's off the path that you need to take. It's just a detour that's not needed, unless someone respawns over here, because they died and you backed up as far as you could to get the respawn. But what if there was a better respawn? There's one right there. It's closer. You just have to walk this way instead of having to walk around and then go into the field. But that closer respawn is actually further forward in map progression to this here. We can follow the line over. That means that if you're in this area and a teammate dies, the difference between them spawning in sightline distance and them spawning behind an army of ambients is standing right here and going further back and standing over here. A lot of the time, I tell people to look for this jutting out piece of wood. As long as you're in front of this, you'll get the good respawn right there. You'll notice that there's actually 3 spots. So if only one person is dead, you can technically stand right here and get that respawn. 2 people are dead, 3 people are dead. But this is where you want to be. And if you go too far back, even just a single step here, you've got them a worse respawn. So again, just like monster and patrol trigger management, if you're planning on playing in a tournament or just want to have better map knowledge, I highly suggest picking maps to go through or looking at the maps that are in that current tournament, and walk through with the level debug mod on and look at respawn locations. See if you can find strange points like this that can actually determine a better respawn for your teammates. Because the difference between walking here and walking here can be 7 Chaos Warriors and a group of Maulers and 2 hordes of getting your teammate up. So that's all I had planned to talk about. Did anyone have any questions or anything? It's interesting to try and find these points where your progression teleports. When will I finish my respawn guides? I have no clue. I don't know if I'll even have time to ever finish them. This is an interesting one. You can see my map progression is just stuck, despite the fact that I'm moving back and forth. And it actually doesn't go forward until you get past this guy here. Alright. Oh, it's even further than I thought. Oh no, it wasn't that. It's that you can hit a trigger. But yeah. I don't go past these respawn points. Those 2 over there until I go past him. Here. Any tips for learning triggers instead of just get good? It's not about getting good, it's about spending the time to look up the information. The information is there, it's just spending the time to look at it. Or play with other people that know them already and can point them out to you as you play through the map. But it's use the mod yourself to look through them, watch Cooley's videos, or play with people that are willing to explain them and show them to you. You can play with the mod turned on. As far as I know, there's no issues with that, as long as it's not in the middle of a tournament. But if you're just playing, you know, with you and your friends or whatever, I don't think it conflicts with anything to have the level debug going at the same time as playing. So you can definitely use that to help you visualize things. And what I did over here is usually when I find a trick like that, you know, a better respawn spot to stand, or a monster trigger that I don't want to hit, I look for something in the map that I can use to look at and know where I'm standing in relation to the triggers while I'm playing. So I pointed out this piece of wood that juts out. I look for things like that as just a visual guide of where to stand. You know, over here, my map progression is all the way over there until it, like right about this point, and then I pass the respawn trigger. So I just find something general and say, oh, this pile of wood, as long as I'm near this pile of wood, I'm okay, and my teammates will spawn there. And the difference between the pile of wood and right here is less than a second of walking time, so it's not going to make that big of a difference. But just general spots, you can think, okay, if my teammates are dead, I want them to respawn there, find this pile of wood. As long as I'm near it, we're good. And just do things like that for the different maps that you plan on playing. And the very important respawn triggers. Not all maps have this big of a distance between respawn points. You know, sometimes it really is as simple as just go backwards through the map until you can't anymore, or you don't feel comfortable losing that much ground. Righteous Stand is a good example of that. In Righteous Stand, there's so many spots that people can respawn, especially in the second trigger after the middle event. It's basically, if you want a good respawn, you can just keep going backwards. There are some trick spots in Righteous Stand, but for the most part, it's like, hey, can I continue to go backwards? Well, then I'll get a better respawn. But some of the maps have trick spots like this. Do you know the exact formula used to calculate progression across all 4 teammates? Because sometimes I had people stand ahead of a possible good respawn, but the other 3 were way behind, and it still ended up being the good one. No, I don't. As far as I know, and someone else can correct me, but as far as I know, it looks at the person furthest forward. I don't think it looks at, like, the host or anything like that. I'm pretty sure it just looks at the furthest forward person in map progression. If there was a time that didn't seem to be the case, I haven't seen it personally, that would be very interesting. Yeah. So if you had a time where someone else was like ahead of this, but they still got the good respawn, I'm not sure what would cause that, other than one thing to think about that it could be is that if you look at this spot here, there are 3 locations that a person can respawn. 2 of them are dictated by this orb, but one of them is actually dictated by this orb. So if only one person is dead, you have 3 people alive, 1 person's dead, passing this won't actually prevent them from spawning there because you're still behind this orb. And for this orb, you can actually, if I remember correctly, you can go to like, alright, it's like right around here. Somewhere around here. Oh yeah, if you hug the wall, you can sit like right here and still be behind it. Oops, I keep doing that, spawning in the floor. But if you hug this wall, your map progression's over here, and you'll lose it. So if only one person is dead, technically the team can sit at these doors waiting for them. That being said, I guess as far as your example of one person being ahead of the group and still getting the good respawn, it could have been a case where you were technically turning off 2 possible respawns, but there was still one available in that location. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for stopping by. If there's no other questions or anything, that's all I had to talk about. Hopefully it was helpful to you guys. Hopefully you learned something. If you ever have questions about this kind of stuff, pretty much anyone in the modded community is friendly. They'll answer your questions. They'll help you. But you can message me too, either on Discord or wherever. It's a little bit of a confusing concept, but hopefully I explained it in a way that made sense. Yeah. Thanks again for stopping by. Hope you guys have a good rest of your nights. Take care.